All right, guys. I hope everybody's nice and full. The sessions after lunch tend to be the tough ones, right? Hopefully this is energizing. By way of a quick introduction, my name is Ryan. I am one of the two co-founders at Interview Kickstart. You'll see our stuff all over the place. It's my co-founder, Soham. Just a very quick background of Interview Kickstart, just to set some context so you understand, why we are here. We run a platform that helps people prepare for very tough technical interviews. It is actually not for students. It is built for working professionals. Most folks who do our course are in the age range of, let's say, 4 or 5 years of experience going up to maybe 20, 25 years of experience. On an average, let's say 12 to 15 years of experience. We've been around for quite a while. This is the 6th year that we've been running this. We worked with over 2,500 folks, generated upwards of 100 million in offers. And I'd say the secret sauce of our program is that everybody who trains on the platform is a hiring manager or a tech lead at a Google or a Facebook, one of the top companies. We have a bunch of sessions today where we'll have a few of our instructors speaking as well. But this session is particularly important to us, right? This session is on ageism and how do you combat it, right? This is an incredibly meaningful topic. This is an industry that changes so fast, right? That one needs to fundamentally stay always prepared, right? Always learning new things. This is also the time where you are seeing a lot of people who got into the industry, say 20, 30 years ago, right? Thinking about interviewing again. The interview process itself has fundamentally changed. And here's an interesting thing. Over the last year or so, maybe a little bit more, we have suddenly seen a lot of people talking about diversity, right? Diversity is hugely important, extremely meaningful, and it has finally got its time in the sun with people actively talking about it. Still a long way to go, but at least the conversation started. Unfortunately, that has not happened in the area of ageism. It is equally important, equally compelling a topic to talk about, but we don't hear people talking about it. And at IK, we believe that this is something that people should be talking about, which is why we chose to do this as one of our 6 sessions today. The way the session is going to go is we have Jody here. I was going to introduce Jody, but he was telling me a little bit about himself outside beyond what I knew, and I think he does a fabulous job of telling you his story. So he's going to do it 100 times better than I could. Now, I don't have that same level of conviction of Soham, so I am going to introduce Soham to you, right? Soham's my co-founder, my partner in crime. Soham was the first director of engineering at Box. He joined Box very early. Box was, I think, typical garage startup. He stayed with Box all the way till it IPO'd. Soham is somebody who has thought deeper about technical interviews than really anybody I know or have met or can imagine, right? We run Interview Kickstart together, and so Soham is going to chip in as well with some of his thoughts. My background, sorry, I didn't introduce myself enough. I'm a co-founder at IK, and before IK, I used to work as an entrepreneur in residence at Axel Partners, work with a whole bunch of fast-growing companies. Now, with that, let me hand this over to Jody. So Jody, could you tell us about yourself, tell them what you told me, and just tell them your story. Incidentally, you guys should look at the cheat sheet that he's brought.
This is a punch card for anyone who has not touched one. You can come and touch it later. I was, I think, maybe privileged to be the last incoming freshman class who needed to buy a ream of these before we could take our Fortran 77 course. So I put my notes on the back of it. I have a lot more. If you need these things, I still have a lot more.
Vintage. Sell them.
Can you tell them about your story, Jody? How did you get here?
Right. So I came to know Soham because 4 years ago I was thrust into the job market. So, but the way there was essentially, I'd been to college. I had interviews while in college. I picked one of those. And it was kind of an easy ride for the next 30 some odd years. I think sometimes it was a headhunter and it would attract. I would go talk to a company and it was just a matter of talking to them, and I was young and they hire. Most of the time it was through friend connections, people I'd worked with that wanted to, that would hire me, bring me in, and we'd have some kind of interview, and then I would start working there. About 25 years ago, I started working at IBM, and that was not that way, but it was recruited, and I was hired in at that time into the research organization as it happened. Worked there for almost 20 years, and then the same guy who had hired me in at IBM was now at Dell, starting a research organization in Dell. So he talked to hire me into that, and it was very easy. And then a month later, I learned that I was going to be laid off along with the whole rest of his group because of the EMC acquisition that was shaking up Dell to its core at that point. So I arranged myself, I had an internal interview at Dell with another group, and I think I had one other interview with through a guy that I knew at IBM. And I quickly found out what a technical interview was. I had assumed those were for Google and for Facebook. I had not understood that those were ubiquitous through the industry. I was completely unprepared, especially because I had an electrical engineering degree, not a computer science degree. I hadn't had data structures, teaching classes or anything of that nature. So that was where I realized I needed to do something, and I just internet search found, I don't think there are even today all that many companies that are doing these kinds of classes to help people prepare for technical interviews. I happen to think, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I think that Interview Kickstart is a really great one, and it was a couple month thing to get through that. I think it's 2 months, yeah. And it was plus because there was stuff that they didn't get to in the normal time, so it runs over a little bit. And then I was able to, I was off work for maybe about 5 months. It wasn't too bad. And started working at SAP where I still am. So that's my story.
Awesome. Quite an inspiration. I was telling Jody that a couple of weeks ago in one of our info sessions, we had a candidate who was asking me a question and said, I think this is really the end of the road for me. I'm not sure I can go to another job. And I was quite curious because there's a sense of dissonance. The person sounded really young and then said this, right? He then proceeded to tell me that he was 35. And I was like, I'm 40. And I'm a spring chicken. So, quite an inspiration, Jody. Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's get to a bunch of questions, right? Maybe I start with Soham now. So Soham, we talked briefly about why this is particularly hard in the software engineering space, right? Ageism is felt much more here. It's compounded a lot more when you do interviews, right? Can you share, and then maybe come back to Jody, why is it particularly hard in this industry?
Yes, so this is a very peculiar industry, right, what we have. It changes really, really fast compared to other industries, right? All industries definitely change, but the pace of change in what we do as programmers is just mind-boggling. And my friends who do knee surgeries as doctors, like really nothing has changed in the last 20 years for them. Yes, a little bit technology has gone a bit better, but like nothing mainstream has actually changed for them, right? Thinking about buying refrigerators, for example, right? I bought refrigerator from the same company my dad bought it from, and my kid is going to buy potentially from the same companies. Right? Like that is not the pace of change that we're talking here. Right? Obviously, all industries change, and refrigerators have also improved, but this is just staggeringly high. when I was hiring, there was a misunderstanding in the process that because there is a lot of change in this industry, person who has several years of experience brings in about the same value as person who has only a few years of experience, because the technology hasn't been around for that long. So why does it matter? Right? 5 years out of college or the last 5 years of experience? Right? I personally don't agree with that, but that is one of the core fundamental reasons that we see what we see in the industry. Right? Many people, 80% of the world still interviews on what you have done in the past, like interview on a certain programming language or a certain technical domain or a business domain. Right? And because it is relatively new, because the assumption is that this has come in relatively new, it doesn't really matter, right? Why don't we just hire someone who's younger instead? Right? So that gets in, and that's a very difficult argument to actually get around at work. But that is why we see this, what we see, right? Compared to other fields, like say accounting, where experience matters a lot, right? I go to an accountant who has several years of experience. I actually seek them out because I know that they have seen a lot before. Or lawyers, that they have fought all different kinds of cases before, right? But that is not the case in software engineering. That's not how you start to think about it, right? When you seek people out, you're like, 5 years Java, 5 years Java, same thing, right? That's really where it begins, and then it becomes a more difficult challenge to do. So that's primarily why.
Okay. Do you have anything to add, Jody, to that?
Not too much, I don't think. I don't think that software engineering is the only field. I think that many fields have a lot of change, but it's certainly true of all high tech, because the entire industry is built on the notion that things have to change. We don't have jobs if things don't keep changing really fast. Gordon Moore really screwed us 50 or 60 years ago. Well, he didn't make it happen, but he certainly observed it pretty well. So, but I think there are some things that are maybe a little bit. Certainly the style of interviewing and hiring is changed very significantly, probably in this industry more. Probably Google or something related to Google helped that out. Google's decision to hire a huge number of people, young people, really quickly, and coming up with this idea of a technical interview is very well suited for that. So I think it's an example where even the idea of how you go from company to company and is changed a lot, not just the technology itself. So
Okay.
Some thoughts.
Awesome. So, we alluded to this earlier. This process is actually compounded quite significantly when you're actually trying to change jobs, right? When you are at your own organization, I'm sure you might feel it, but possibly less. It's actually compounded a lot more when you want to switch. So let's talk about that process a bit, and maybe I start with you, Jody. When you were thinking of switching, right? When you moved on from Dell and then you found your way into SAP, how did you go about actually finding the right opportunities for yourself? That's like the top of the funnel, right? So how did you start?
Well, I have to say, because I was jobless, I was certainly broader in my interests than I might otherwise have been. So, it's Indeed, LinkedIn to look for jobs that are posted. I'm sure there's other places. Dell did provide career coaching.
Okay.
And a lot of that seemed to revolve around getting that LinkedIn profile correct. And that has a lot to do with keywords, because everything is automatically done. There aren't headhunters that are scrolling through these things anymore. It's all search now. So keywords are very important. Apparently references are very important in LinkedIn, getting a wide set of them from a variety of types of people. Let's see, I'll just check here. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Okay. Now, to you, Soham, there are many companies that people, there are, just in the Bay Area, there are plethora of companies, right?
Yeah.
So when you are looking to switch, and you are somebody who is, let's say, very experienced, are there certain types of companies that you should be looking at versus, your typical startup, or is there no difference? Have you seen this with any of our candidates?
Yeah, so generally speaking, what I've realized is that there are 2 or 3 ways you can think about this. 2 or 3 ways you can slice this. One, what Jody mentioned, networking references, very important, right? One advantage we have as senior people, and I include myself because now I'm 40, right? Because 40 is protected class. I don't know if you knew that, right? EEOC, you cannot discriminate against people who are above 40, and there are lots of concessions that you have to give when you have to let them go and stuff like that. So I'm fortunate, So the thing that we have going in seniority is networks and connections. It is true that not the entire network responds when we need it, right? And sometimes the network is also biased. Right? But having and chasing out those connections who actually believe in you becomes very important today than before, right? That's one. 2, observe that the larger companies are only getting larger, right? Bigger companies are only getting bigger, right? And when they are getting bigger, they're hiring at a scale which is staggering, right? 50,000 people a year is what Amazon wanted to hire, right? That is a problem that the world has not faced before in a single company, right? Very rare to be hiring that many people like that scale. They will have to hire people in the entire spectrum, right? They will not be able to just say that I will only hire people with 5 years of experience, right? They will have positions that will span the entire spectrum. And so do that. So basically, chase people who believe in hiring senior people, right, from your network, because you have a network over other people who are just starting their careers, and seek out larger companies. Right? Those are the 2 things that I typically see work. For it.
Okay, let's get to a little bit of a sensitive, edgy topic. Resumes, right? One of the things that people worry a lot about, apart from the fact that you now have to, have this resume in 1 to 2 pages, which is a shame if you have a lot of experience. But the more challenging question there is relates to age, right? So this is a question that I get a lot in the program from some of our more experienced engineers who are going out to interview. And the question is this, and let me put it to both of you. Should I reveal my age in my resume? Or should I have things in there that reveal my age? Or should I try to hide it, right? Jody, maybe you can start by telling us about when you applied. Did you think about this? How did you deal with it? Was it something that you didn't bother about?
So definitely the career coach thought it was pretty important to not expose age as much as possible. And I chose to go with that. So the methods were, certainly the resume should be no more than 2 pages because people don't have attention span beyond that anyway, if they ever did. It should be, don't need to put your years that you were in college. You don't need to necessarily list chronologically all of your jobs going back to the first job you had out of college. So pick the important ones and of course make all of the main bullets. But one other thing that I chose to do, I think there's something called a functional resume versus a chronological or something like that. I can't remember the exact terms. I did a bit of a mixture myself, which was just start with my achievements and where I made impact. And that is certainly something where, in a sense, it exposes your age because the more seniority you have, the more likely that you will have made significant impact. But on the other hand, it takes away from this chronological list of jobs and just, here's what I have done. and with the idea that here's what I can do for you. One thing I was just mentioning to Ryan before before our talk here was I read an HBR article about the bias in hiring women versus men, and apparently some research showing that women get hired for what they can show that they have done. Men get hired for what they believe they can be done more. And I'm kind of thinking that someone who's obviously more senior, more likely, man or woman, more likely to be on the basis of what they have done rather than what they can do. So to me, it makes sense to show what you have done. So.
Okay. So when we on the platform talk to folks, what's our advice? What have you seen?
We have seen it work both ways. All right. There are some people, this is more or less like a belief thing. I personally believe to be straightforward like that. Obviously, I haven't done the job search firsthand yet. But I have seen people who just believe that, no, I'm just going to put my year of graduation, right? That doesn't bother me. And there are people who say, no, I'm not going to put it. So do what is comfortable for you. If it is comfortable to not put the year of graduation, not show the age, go ahead and do that. I think that's far more important than anything else on the resume. Sure.
You know, just to add, I think one of the things that I've seen is some people actually choose to wear it as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Right? And it comes down to really how comfortable you are and how you want to portray it. You know, all styles work.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. One more thing that I learned from one of my managers at Box. He had two versions of his resume, not functional and chronological, but a resume to get an interview, which is like a 1 or 2 page resume, and then a 9-page version of what he has done. And so when he goes to interview, right, he puts that stack in front of the person and says, look, this is all I have done. This is what I have done. And so just another different creative ways of thinking about it, right? A resume to get an interview is different from resume for discussion when you already have an interview. That you have much more leeway to do.
Okay, so just switching gears, we've talked about reaching out to companies. We've talked about a little bit about resumes. And then you have this whole area of prep, right, which is kind of the area that we are in. And now prep is becoming more and more common. Actually, one of the changes we've seen of late is that most top companies, be it a Google or a Facebook or an Amazon or an Airbnb or an Uber or a LinkedIn, pretty much all these companies across the board send out material for you to prepare before you actually come in for the interview, right? Because they also realize that it's quite hard. So when you were thinking about preparing, Jody, you mentioned briefly that you research, and thank you for the kind words on IK. But apart from IK, right, what was your thought process about prep? Did you have some sort of timeline? How long did you take? How difficult did you find it in the beginning? Because like you said, it was a bit of a steep learning curve up front, right? So could you talk to us about the actual preparation for the interview and how you went about doing it?
Okay, so as I said, I basically flunked the first 2 interviews. I think that I got a question on one of them that is covered in one of those code books. It's the stupidest question in the world, which is, how do you delete the last element of a singly linked list if you don't know the origin of the singly linked list? I can't imagine why someone would ask that, but they did. So that was when I realized I was in an entirely different world. I felt like I had no options but to find something. Obviously, I didn't have a job at that point, so I had all the time in the world to learn. And so Interview Kickstart was one of the few that was listed. It was local, which was good. And it was a steep learning curve because, as I said, I hadn't had a data structures class. There were other things that I was missing in my basic learning. Luckily, I had the time. So, I mean, there are people who do this. I think most people do it when they're in the middle, when they have a full-time job. That's going to be a lot harder. And I kind of found myself coaching some of them along the way because they didn't have the time to invest in it that I did, so I ended up helping them a bit in the background. What did I miss out of this? Just a moment. Yeah, I think that's, did I get all your points?
How long did you take?
Well, it was the 2 months plus.
It was 2 months plus?
I started, so I basically took a few interviews at first. I realized it wasn't going to work out. I didn't want to keep going into situations that I was clearly not going to be able to succeed at, so I just stopped interviewing. And then I started to arrange other interviews probably when I was mostly done with the course,
Okay.
I think.
And so you were doing this pretty much full time at that point of time?
Yeah.
For folks?
And I also want to mention that the mock interviews during this time were also important to get through because that's really an important part of the process is to really be prepared.
Yeah. So mock interviews are interesting, right? The reason mock interviews are interesting is because one of the problems in this space is that companies don't give you feedback, right? They actually are very strict about not giving you feedback. And so what happens is you're flying blind, right? You have no feedback loops. You don't know why you've done well, why you've done badly. Sometimes you think you've done well and you end up not getting the offer. Yes, so mock interviews are interesting. So in terms of timing, Jody was working full time, right? So he had the opportunity to spend more time per day. But for those who are not working full time, right, and who want to up level, what sort of time commitment should they be keeping in mind? Maybe amount of hours per day or overall time, what's the range of months? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, generally if you are working full-time, if you have a full-time job and you're wanting to switch, keep about 3 to 4 months. That should be like the baseline to do this. Persistence is very, very important through this. It's the algorithm stuff, the designing of large-scale systems, and often some of the behavioral stuff. It's not easy to get through. This interview preparation stuff is not something that we have either done in school or we have done at job. It's just a completely third beast that has emerged in our field. And getting through that is not a walk in the park. It is very doable, very fun, right? But one has to do it consistently and persistently. It takes 3 to 4 months, roughly.
Okay, so 3 to 4 months part-time, and how many hours a week are you assuming?
10, 15 hours a week.
10, 15 hours a week. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so Jody, coming to you, right? Like you said, you had a bunch of interviews before you came into, before you went down this sort of interview process, right? So could you share your reflections on how the two interview processes are actually fundamentally different, right? Like the stuff that you did before, and when you went and like you said, you failed a couple of interviews, right? And then you've succeeded after that. What are some of the major changes? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question, in particular, was it strange being interviewed by people who might have been significantly younger? Right? Did that make you awkward? Did that make you nervous? Did that not bother you? Were you like, what the hell is he asking me? When I started working, he was in his nappies, right? So it's possible, right? I had that experience recently.
Has anybody in the room not had that experience?
So why don't I answer that one first, and then you'll have to remind me about the first question.
Okay.
So it did not bother me to be interviewed by people younger than me, but I just have to confess that this technical interview to me is a fad that I hope will go away relatively soon. I don't think it really hits to the core of what people can contribute, maybe other than a pretty junior person out of college. And what really did bother me was that people didn't seem to be interested in talking to me about the things that I thought where I could really fundamentally, make fundamentally strong contributions.
Would you liken it to a final exam?
Yeah, it is, I think, the first kind of interview that I have seen where you're called upon to perform under pressure. And I know people that have just backed off of being able to do that at all. People considerably younger than me, actually, just because of that. And I'm sorry, but I'm just going to spout out here. But I think it works worked for Google, worked for Facebook, and probably still does, because they get a lot of people who come in for interviews, and they're just looking to fill a lot of slots. And it's kind of like a college admit. You may not be fair, but you have a profile of what's worked in the past, and you try to fit your new college admissions to that profile. Many people who might do very well get left behind, but the people who come in, they, probably a good percentage of them do well. So, and I think that when Google and Facebook and so forth, when they really started using this process, they were attracting younger engineers. And, not like my brother-in-law who went to work for them when he was 50, but that was, he was kind of special. He's been always the software guy, and start to finish. So I think Google is changing, and Facebook is changing the profile of, and all the other LinkedIn and so on and so forth, are changing. They're getting older, and people that they're hiring, like my brother-in-law was, but I don't think that their processes have changed all that much. So they're still selecting based on very similar criteria, I would guess. So I suspect it's not working quite as well as it used to, because their needs have changed, but their process is probably not so much. Although a friend I know worked at Google said a couple of years ago that he saw memos going out that said our interview process is changing to be more relevant to more senior engineers. I don't know how that's gone. So
Yeah. That has improved. They have made some changes. So Google has separated different ladders out. There are core software engineering ladders, and there are other, so to speak, other software engineering ladders, or very domain-specific ladders, where the interview process is more specific to the domain. They still don't go away from algorithms. There's at least one question in the entire panel, which is some data structures algorithms, but they have reduced that in certain ladders, even certain organizations. Google, obviously now it's Alphabet and such, and so that has definitely started to happen in there.
Right. There's one more thing I would say about that, and I didn't get to the first part of your question yet, if it still exists, but I just wanted to point out something.
Yeah.
I think that, so over time, of course, as I've been working in the last 4 years, there is stuff that comes in LinkedIn mail saying, would you like to interview here, would you like to interview there? And the thing that becomes difficult is I always feel like if I was going through another interview cycle, then I'd want to spend the month or two it would take to refresh myself on all these things so I could do well again. Because my daily job is not deeply software included, and so I once again have to refresh myself. But to do that, refreshment is enough of a overhead that I feel like I only want to do that if I'm going to go through an interview cycle with a number of companies. So the fact that one headhunter comes in and says, do you want a job? Well, just go through this interview cycle. It's not, I can't really get myself off the ground to just do this month or two refresher to do that one interview. And I don't have necessarily enough motivation to go through an interview cycle at this stage in my career. So the advice is keep refreshed, keep interviewing every couple of years, but it does take some overhead, so I'm not sure how to balance that. I wasn't able to. I've just stayed in the same job since I got it.
So the question then is, so maybe just following up on what you're saying, Soham, why are companies using this interview process? Right? What's the thought process? I'm sure most people here would like to know, right? Like, if it doesn't make sense, it's something that people are talking about changing. Part of it is change. Really, across the board, it's only gotten more and more, right? So what's happening now is companies look at Facebook and Google and they say, oh, wow, they're amazing companies. They interview like this. Maybe we interview like this and become an amazing company, right? Well, that's really what's happening. And it's now, it's not only in the US, it's not only the top companies, it's on all types of companies, all startups, all new companies. Internationally, it's becoming more and more popular with some changes really at the fringes. So there must be something that these folks have thought about, right? Like, what's the thought process?
Yeah, I suppose, so breaking this into two parts. One is why do they have this process? Why does still the damn thing exist, right? Simply because, like many things in life, it exists because it is very convenient for companies to do this. It is a very, very convenient process at scale. If I'm hiring one person a quarter, yes, I can take my time and understand every applicant and understand where they're coming from and what do I ask them and such. If I'm hiring 400 people a week, there is no humanly possible way for me to have a process that is tailored for everybody and justified to the applicant pool. I am going to look for what is convenient for me and my engineers. And what is convenient for me and my engineers? Look, most engineers don't even want to be in the interview room. Right? They just don't want to be there. They just want to be coding because they are not judged on interviews, right? How many interviews they have done in a quarter. They are judged on how many features they have shipped in a quarter, right? And when I'm saying, no, you must interview today and you must interview tomorrow and the day after, like, what is this, right? They don't want to be there. And there are so many applicants coming into the pipeline. What is my incentive as VP engineering? My incentive is to design a process which is super efficient, super convenient for my folks. I know that because of the work I'm doing, I'm going to get the applicant pool. Right? That is not my concern. And I am a tier 1 company. People are going to apply. My concern is how do I build an efficient interview funnel? And this process lends itself very well to that. And I'm hiring at scale. So I can't be looking at the domain alone. If I'm hiring somebody for payment systems, if I wait for payment systems engineers to apply, I'm probably never going to hire. Right? I will have to hire from all domains, everywhere. You have done deployment systems, doesn't matter. I'm looking for a payment systems engineer. Come in, I'll still interview you. The interview process will largely be domain agnostic, which is, let's go back to school. Right? Data structures, algorithms, and design. Right? How do you design large-scale systems? Right? So that is why today a large portion of interview processes at companies that are hiring at scale is like that. Right? It is very, very domain agnostic. And there is a little bit of domain-specific part. Why are so many companies latching onto it? That's just mostly me too, right? What Ryan said.
No, and it's actually quite funny
Right.
because when you talk to some of the,
Right.
for my time at Axel, I used to talk to startups and ask them, hey, why are you interviewing like this? You are interviewing to hire 3 people in 3 months, right? You don't need to do this. And you know what the answer was? If we don't interview like this, then the candidates are going to think that we are not a company worth working
Exactly. Yes.
with.
Right? It's just
so it's a circular process, and it's getting more and more, let's say, it's deepening. But let me just switch gears, just in the interest of time. There's so many interesting things to cover. We've talked a lot about the technical side of the process, right? But there's also the behavioral side of the interview. And that is a side actually where experienced engineers can really shine, right? Because you have much more experience. And so some of the behavioral aspects are things where your experience really can be played up. When you were interviewing Jody, right, or maybe now in your time in SAP, how do you think about the difference between the behavioral parts of the interview process and the technical parts of the interview process? Did you prepare specifically for some of that? Did you think that that's an opportunity for you to shine? What were your thought processes on the behavioral side?
So as I'm listening to this, I realize I may have misunderstood. So let me just get a clarification. When you say the behavioral side, do you mean how you as a candidate behave in the interview and what your behavior is?
No,
when they ask questions about behavior.
No, it's more about your ability to solve to be situationally smart. Things like if you have a engineer on your team who is not performing and is clearly not up to the mark, how would you deal with that, right? Those sort of contextual situations.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so I think it's just, you have to practice and practice. Some of it comes, as you're right, as a senior person, some of it just comes by intuition and being able to say, I don't think there's that many questions fundamentally. They come in different forms with little variations, but I think that the actual questions themselves are not all that different. I mean, I remember one that I interviewed where someone asked, so how would you interview somebody to make sure that they fit into your culture of the company? And so that was a bit of an oddball, something you can't practice for so much. But mostly they are, if you've been through, in your normal course of work, you've been through these number of problems, and you know more or less, or situations, fundamentally it's just a matter of, the only way to make sure that it comes out in a pressure situation is that it's almost automatic, so you just have to practice. That's the only way I know. I didn't do so well with that.
Okay, last question before I throw this to final thoughts to both of you. Soham, when you were director of engineering at Box, right, and you interviewed, I know for a fact that actually you made offers to some folks who were very experienced. Just reflect on that process, right? Interviewing people who are more experienced. As a hiring manager, what are some of the things you saw that these folks did really well? What are some of the things that you think that you saw where you're like, oh, that's a bit of a red flag. You should not be doing stuff like this.
So one very common thing that I saw was many times people who are very senior would feel a bit entitled. I've had conversations where they would say, I have 30 years of experience, why are you even interviewing me? I'm like, I understand, I respect that, but I have to interview you, right? I have to at least cover my bottom, right? That's why I'm interviewing you. But so that feeling sometimes comes through, and I understand why that feeling comes through as well. I mean, 30 years is a lot of experience, and the world possibly wasn't as fair in all 30 years, and I understand that, but I don't have the veto to just nix the interview. Right? Nobody has the veto to just nix the interview and just get somebody in. We have to follow the proper process. Right? You could ask for concessions like, look, you are hiring for storage engineering, and I have done 20 years of storage engineering. Can I just come meet you? That is a very valid question. Right? But just saying that, no, just skip my interview, that doesn't really work. That's one. The other thing I've seen is that, as I'm thinking, many times senior people felt that the younger engineers were the enemy, right, so to speak, like they were the other side and I'm this side. And I can understand why that develops over time when you've had so many interviews and a lot of younger people have interviewed you and you haven't gotten the role you wanted. But the truth is that there are a lot of younger people who are looking forward to working with you because they want to learn. They want to learn from your experience as well. Right? A lot of them are like that. Box's culture was very, very, very much like that. Right? Let's learn from people who have done this before. So don't make that assumption going in that they are just your enemy. Like very likely they also want to just learn from you, and they are there to understand your experience. When they're asking questions, that's really the point. We made, of the many offers that we had made, the particular two that I remember, David Maynard, some of you might know him. We hired him at I think age 59 or something like that. And we went, and he went through the same interview process like anyone else. Right? Never once did he say that, oh my God, why are you asking me a coding question? Right? Like I was early at electronic arts and I've done a lot of coding in my life. Why are you asking me coding questions? No, like the moment we put a coding question in front of him, his eyes light up just like he's a kid in a candy store. So, wow, that's a new problem. Let's try and solve it, right? Versus, oh my God, there's a new problem, right? There are like two ways to deal with it, right? And we knew that he's senior, and so we didn't expect the kind of speed that you'd get from a college grad, but got the same fundamentals, right? The same process. He didn't stop at a brute force solution and said, no, that's it, I'm giving up. Like, no, he just kept going, right? And he arrived at a solution that was very close. And not just that, like the next interview was a coding interview and did the same thing. Right? And how did he get an interview at Box? Right? A network, right? Like somebody he knew went to grammar school with somebody at Box, right? Just completely random, and he got an interview like that. Victor was the other guy. Same thing. He had grandkids when we hired him. right? And he was really funny. He had written a lot of code in his life. So he breezed through the interviews, and then he comes and tells us, did you think that I was not going to be able to write code? You wasted my time. Like, you know, it was a completely different flipped. Right? And we got him, and he got paid more than our VP of engineering. Right? So those things happen, right? But very normally they executed the entire process. Right? There was no entitlement in the process, and they just went through like any other interview. Right? So
We have a session later today. It's actually on domain switching, so it's completely different. One of the panelists is actually a guy called Ganesh. Ganesh had tons of experience at Intel. And he's a really interesting guy. He switched from EDA to software engineering. He switched from Intel to Facebook, right? And he did so well in the interview process that he's now our most prolific coach on IK. Right? So he has mastered stuff so well. So we see people who are willing to do this, like Jody, who tend to up-level quite significantly. All right, just quickly to wrap up, if you guys have any thoughts, I just want to summarize this before I throw this open to questions. I think we've captured most of what Soham had to say. Jody, I know you had some specific thoughts that you wanted to share.
Sure.
As just summary thought, if you could just share those, and then maybe I wrap it up and throw it open for questions.
Sure. A couple of concepts I just wanted to mention. One is this concept of crystallized intelligence versus fluid intelligence, which I don't think are great names, but it's probably an okay concept. The idea being that your brain is not working the same at age 50 as it did at age 20. And you need to be aware, can be aware of that this is going to be happening or is happening. And so the way that your thinking process goes is different. You are maybe less creative, less able to integrate things quick. Well, it's not integrative actually. It's about inferring things maybe. Whereas as you get older, you're pulling more from your experience and being able to actually integrate from that experience into the right path, the things to do. So I'd look that up. I think it helps because I don't think most people are not going to be able to be doing the same job for 40 years. You have to move your what you do along to match the way your brain's going to go. And then two other thoughts that I just thought I'd share real quickly. EQ, emotional intelligence, is something that I think you improve on, you can and should improve on as you get older. These are the things that really help with the kinds of jobs that you can do as a more senior person. And also a concept that was introduced by one of IQ's coaches to me is, what's it called? Growth mindset, yes, if you haven't heard of that. You're not static in your abilities. If you have the attitude and the mindset that you keep learning, that really helps to adapt as you're going through the aging of your brain. So that's it.
Okay, awesome. So, I took the liberty of writing a few points down when we were talking earlier, just to kind of summarize this and then throw this open for questions. So I think the first thing that we talked about today is that this is a really important thing to talk about, right? Ageism is an important thing to talk about. Hopefully people talk about it much more. We started off by looking at the top of the funnel, right? So how do you get interviews? Your best bet is to network, right? As an experienced engineer, you tend to have much larger networks than most folks. But we highlighted a crucial point. I don't remember who highlighted that point, maybe Soham, is that within your networks, look for people who are supporters, right? People who are going to look at you and be people who are happy to connect you. In terms of your resume, the big question is always around age. We've seen it work both ways, right? Short resumes are better than long resumes, right? 1 to 2 pages. When we talk to folks who are interviewing, we actually have a whole bunch of technical recruiters on the IK panel, and they tell us that they spend not more than 10, 15 seconds on an interview. Sorry, on a resume, right?
Yeah.
And so, well, I wish the interviews were that short. This is an interview process that does require preparation, right? So let's not kid ourselves. Everybody needs to prepare, right? Across the board. Fresh grads, few years experience, extremely experienced, everybody's needing to prepare, right? And the reason you need to prepare is because nobody is doing this as part of their day job, right? Nobody gets up in the morning thinking, oh, I'm going to work today. I wonder how I design a streaming service like YouTube. It's already been designed, right? Nobody's thinking about that. Or when you're getting into Uber, you're not thinking, wow, I should be designing an app like Uber. You're not thinking about that, right? You're not thinking about designing software for a parking lot, but these are the questions that you get in an interview. And so you must prepare. Persistence is key. Common pitfalls, right? This is the process, right? It is changing. Some cases it's becoming much more prevalent. Some cases it's changing on the edges. At best, it's changing on the edges, right? So it's not going to change anytime soon from where we stand. Just accept it for what it is, right? And junior engineers are there to learn from you. They'd love to pick your brains, right? They'd love to understand your experience. And there's so much you can teach them, right? How do you handle yourself in your career? How do you remain always up to date? How do you deal with office politics, right? These are things that most young engineers have no clue about. And they would love to learn this from you guys, right? And from our experience, we have seen so many people who take the time, put in the effort like Jody, right? I mean, we saw the punch card, right? Who are deliberate, who've thought about it, and there is absolutely no reason to believe that if you put in the time and the effort, that you won't evolve. Jody, just to wrap this up, Jody talked about the growth mindset. One of the things I tell people when they are on the platform is, listen, guys, we are all biological beings. We are creating ourselves for tomorrow. There is no, it's not like you're moving down a pathway which is set for you. You can do today things that define who you are going to be tomorrow, right? I stuttered all my life. I don't stutter anymore. I mean, I still stutter. I just know how to control it. The thing is, you have to decide who you want to be tomorrow. And not deciding who you want to be tomorrow is a decision in itself, right? And that is what I want to wrap up with. Let me now throw this open to questions. We have Kevin, who's got a mic. I'm sure you have a bunch of questions. Jody, Soham, guys, feel free. Kevin, yeah.
I get the first one, thank you. So my name's Martin. Now, I'll give you the question first, and then I just want to set the context. So the question is, how effective are and how, as an engineer, do I deal with the one-on-one online interviews, like the Skype interview, the Zoom interview, the Hacker Challenge interview, or whatever? And the context is, I write code every day, all day long, and when I do it, I try to isolate myself in a vacuum. I put on headphones, I just zoom out, 5 levels deep from the around me. And when these interviews come, and I do consulting, so I do a lot of interviews. Every year I'm doing rounds of interviews. This idea of having a camera in my face and another person watching me, even the expressions on my face, in a completely different environment. Even old school, I have the white background versus they have the black, and so on and so forth. I just tell them up front, you guys, you're wasting your time. I'm not going to do well on this test. So how do I deal with this idea of somebody in my face while I'm writing code, and that's not something I'm really used to?
Okay. Jody, you want to take a first stab at it?
I don't know what to do but suck it up, Sorry, but I mean, I think, the practice, I guess, at figuring out how to do it, and being able to keep your focus is the only way I could think of.
So there's a concept called deliberate practice. There's a concept called deliberate practice, right? It is very interesting concept. It is actually developed from the world of sport. I used to play a lot of sport, and so I learned it while playing sport, right? I used to play competitive sport. What deliberate practice is that there is a difference between practice and deliberately practicing. Deliberately practicing is putting yourself in a simulated live environment so that you get very used to it, right? So, for example, on our platform, right, we make you go through a bunch of coding interviews, right, mock interviews. Yanni, who's actually there, right, is one of our instructors, the good-looking guy in the corner, right? He's one of our instructors. He's at Apple, right? He does a bunch of interviews for us as well. That's Omkar. Omkar is one of our instructors as well. We make people go through this because it's a really unnerving situation. Nobody likes to be judged, right? Nobody likes to put themselves in front of people. But what we've seen is if you practice it over a period of time, you can get quite comfortable with that environment. Whereas if you don't practice it, and to what Jody said when we were talking about the behavioral stuff, unless you practice it in that stress environment, it's very difficult to have it come out. Because then it's one more degree of stress, right? So find a way to practice as much as you can in those environments, right? That helps a lot. So you have anything else to add to that?
Just a real quick thing. Do you have a whiteboard at home or wherever you are, where you can? A physical whiteboard, either whiteboard paint or a whiteboard sticker is $10 on Amazon, for example. Many people are also okay with a whiteboard. You don't have to code on a collaborative editor.
Yeah, I would love to do it on a whiteboard. As a matter of fact, what blows my mind is sometimes I'll have companies, the block down the street, want me to do it online rather than just going out one door and down to the next door. And I would love to do it on a whiteboard, but for some reason, they're just not in that mindset.
So if you're at home, right, you can have a whiteboard at your home or your office.
I think the thing is that the question is, they want you to do it on an interview. You can actually ask.
Yes.
You can ask and say, is it okay if I write this down? Now, not everybody might agree, but you could ask, right? But practice, right? Just practice, just simulate these environments.
One last thing. From the company's perspective, how effective is it to do these interviews, the one-on-one? Is it working for them or not?
You mean the phone interviews? Is what you're...
Yeah, the whether it's Zoom or Skype or Hackathon or whatever, the one-on-one interviews like that versus bringing people in and doing the whiteboard. Are they getting the people that they want?
The way they figure out whether it's working for them is they just look at their evaluation. They don't look at how you're feeling through the process. They don't look at how many engineers got hired, not got hired. Right? The FANG companies are the top 5 in NASDAQ. They just look at the evaluation go up and they say, oops, it's working for us.
No, it is working for them.
So
because we shouldn't trivialize the fact that all these companies, the raw material for these companies is people, right? It is the people in the companies who are building what the companies are building. So we shouldn't trivialize this process. Companies are looking to hire the best people, and they believe that this process works. Right? Now, whether it actually works or not is yet to be seen, but their belief is that it works. Right? That's why they double down on this. Otherwise, they would change it. Right?
So it's low impact for them, and so it's just a simple win that they don't have to spend a lot of effort to do the first calling. But what I remember from doing those is it took a lot of the same skills. They didn't want to just see somebody sit there and focus on coding. They want to be having the interaction and the speaking and all that. So and puzzling through the problem. So I tend to think that it's not so much different than the one where you're going to go in and do the coding interview in the room. It's the same behaviors that you need to do, is what I remember. So you should be able to practice both in similar ways, I think.
Okay, guys, sorry, just in the interest of time, maybe we take 2 really quick questions, and then feel free to chat with us outside as well. But maybe we take 2 quick questions before we get to the next session.
Hi, I have a very quick question, hopefully. It's about years of experience. So at what number years of experience no longer matters? So there's a difference between 0 and 5. There's a difference between 5 and 10, but there's not much difference between 45 and 50, right? So at what number it stops being Yeah, at what number it stops mattering anymore.
Soham, do you have any thoughts on that?
Generally, when we used to review resumes, everything about 20 was about the same for us. So anything less than 20, we were like, where is it? But more than 20 was.
There's a difference between 15 and 20.
Yes, that's different.
By the way, I'm not sure if you know, you look exactly like Nicholas Taleb. I don't know if any of you have read Taleb, but you look exactly like him. I thought it was Nicholas Taleb for a second. All right, maybe one last question. Does anybody else have one quick question? And happy to chat off the stage. Yes.
I challenged an interview once and go through the interview process. Oh, thank you. So I go to the interview and it went well technically, it went well personally, all this other stuff. And then I come to this one part of the interview and the guy looks at me and he says, oh yeah, you've got all the perfect low-level experience, you know how to deliver this, you know how to do that, you're just too old. And that was the end of the interview.
You know that is something you can actually report.
Yes.
Right,
But I mean, the problem is that this is done verbally. It's like, yeah, I can identify this. Like, I can't sue anybody for that because there's no way they'd be able to prove it. I can report it, but the problem is I look at that going, if I report it, even within the same company, all I really do is blacklist myself. And yet if I don't do that, the problem is I've already been blacklisted because I'm old. So do I throw myself on the sword and report it, or do I just walk away?
What would you do, Jody, if somebody told you that?
I would, I mean, I'm not sure. It would have to be, I can't say. That's egregious behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether
That is
I would
egregious.
stand up and
That is
and say something, I don't know.
Yeah,
Right.
that's actually
That's
an interesting
true
idea.
too.
That's a really interesting idea.
Name and shame.
Name and shame.
Yep.
He said blog about it and let the world take care of it. So it's a very interesting idea. I don't want to get on your wrong side. All right,
Right.
guys, we have to wrap up. We have a bunch of other sessions. We have a session immediately after this with a bunch of FANG hiring managers. We've got other sessions. We have our stall outside. Feel free. The panelists are both here. Thank you all for your time. Jody, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.